At low tide, the salt flat stretched out wide and flat beneath a high, pale sky. The few patches of grass that clung to the edges seemed almost black in contrast with the shimmering whiteness. Here and there, little streams meandered across the expanse like silver ribbons. Marie, an old woman who sold tea from her cart, would sometimes bring her kettle and a cup up onto this vast plain when it was empty, seeking silence and solitude she couldn't find anywhere else. Today, as she crossed the flat towards her usual spot, a figure caught her eye, a young man, barefoot and shirtless, leaning against a rock near the edge of the salt flat. Marie's cart rumbled to a halt next to him, and the old woman stepped down, pulling a chair out from behind it. "You've got yourself a nice view here," she said without waiting for an answer. The young man, who appeared no older than 25 but with a weathered face that spoke of harder times, nodded slightly. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon where the sky and salt met, blending into one another like water poured across sand. Marie busied herself setting up her kettle over a small fire she lit from dry grass and driftwood. As steam began to rise from the boiling water, she glanced at the man again, his lean frame standing out starkly against the white landscape. "Tea?" she asked softly. He turned his head slowly towards her, eyes questioning. There was something in them that made Marie hesitate for a moment, pain, perhaps? But also an openness, as if he had been waiting. She poured him a cup and handed it to him over the cart. He accepted it wordlessly, bringing it up to sniff before taking a sip. His expression changed subtly, as if a weight lifted from his shoulders with each breath of steam that drifted into his nostrils. Marie watched him for a while, the silence between them comfortable yet heavy. Finally, she broke it again. "So, what brings you out here?" The man looked down at the cup in his hands before glancing back up to meet her gaze. His voice was low and hoarse when he spoke. "I don't know," he admitted. She smiled gently. "Well, you're welcome to stay as long as you like." For a while, they sat without speaking, each absorbed in their own thoughts or the quiet beauty of the salt flat. The wind carried whispers across it, of waves far away and of distant, nameless lands. Marie felt its coolness brush past her. After a time, the young man finished his tea and set the empty cup aside beside the cart. He rose to his feet with a nod of gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. Marie watched him as he began walking back across the flat towards the village. For several minutes, all she could see was his bare back against the white expanse. Then, just when she thought he had disappeared entirely into it, a movement caught her eye, one hand lifting to brush at his face in a gesture of relief. That small action stayed with Marie as she packed up and wheeled her cart away from the salt flat towards home. She didn't know why that day mattered so much, it simply did. But something about the way he had left, a quiet acknowledgement of what might have been lost and gained, lingered in the air long after he was gone.
You're listening to the Empty Teahouse. Somewhere beyond the salt flat, a gull cried out against the fading light. At noon, beneath the quiet hum of early summer, the country market lay in the valley below.
At noon, beneath the quiet hum of early summer, the country market lay in the valley below. A man named Kaito had just arrived from a distant city, his steps slow and deliberate as he wandered between stalls selling vegetables and fruit, past piles of hay for farm animals. The air was thick with the scent of earth and flowers. Near the edge of the bustling square, where the market began to thin out, there stood a small stall unlike any other, a wooden counter with simple hand-carved wooden bowls on display. Kaito paused before it, intrigued by its unassuming nature. He noticed an elderly woman sitting behind the counter, her hands moving deftly as she shaped one of the bowls from a chunk of willow wood. "Excuse me," Kaito said gently. The woman looked up at him and smiled warmly. "Hello. Do you mind if I watch for a while?" She shook her head without speaking, returning to her work. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, carving the bowl into existence from raw material. Each curve she made seemed almost thoughtless, yet it added beauty to an otherwise mundane object. Kaito found himself mirroring her rhythm, his own movements slow and deliberate as he walked around the stall, examining each piece more closely. The bowls were not extravagant, they were functional art, designed for daily use but with a touch of grace that elevated their status beyond mere tools. As Kaito moved back to where the woman sat working, she set down her tools momentarily and offered him one of her finished pieces. "Would you like this?" she asked softly, handing over a bowl with an intricate pattern carved along its rim. "Thank you," Kaito said quietly, his fingers tracing the delicate lines. The woman then reached into a basket beneath the counter, pulling out another unfinished piece and pushing it across to him. "Take this and finish what I began." Surprised but grateful for her trust, Kaito picked up the bowl and the small knife she handed over next. He took a seat on a wooden stool beside her, his heart slowing as he held the knife in one hand and felt the weight of the wood in the other. The task before him was simple yet profound, a smooth surface to carve into something meaningful through patience and care. As Kaito worked on the bowl, the woman continued with hers, their actions intertwining like the gentle flow of a stream around stones. No words were exchanged, but there was understanding shared between them, a quiet acknowledgement that the work itself speaks louder than any conversation. As time slipped by unnoticed, Kaito's hands moved steadily along the wood's grain. Each stroke left behind a trace of his presence, an impression in the bowl he shaped. The woman beside him paused occasionally to offer subtle suggestions with her own unfinished pieces until it was clear she was done teaching and only supporting now. With the last carving complete, Kaito held up the finished product to see how the sunlight reflected off its surface, catching tiny patterns within the wood's texture. He looked at his hands, slightly tired but satisfied, before turning back towards the woman who had guided him without speaking a word. She took the bowl from him and placed it next to her own completed pieces on the counter. Her eyes met Kaito's for just a moment before she nodded approvingly, a silent acceptance of what they had both created together. Kaito stood up, feeling lighter than when he'd arrived but carrying with him something more profound than any physical object from the market square. He paused one last time to gaze at her steady hands moving to clean her tools, then turned and walked away, leaving behind not just a bowl but a small piece of his essence left carved into wood. The sound of the breeze rustling through nearby cornfields followed him out of the village as he continued on his journey.
The wooden bowl felt cool to the touch, its surface smooth yet whispering of the hands that had shaped it. In the mountain footpath after rain, the ground was soft and heavy with water.
In the mountain footpath after rain, the ground was soft and heavy with water. The leaves glistened in hues of deep green, reflecting droplets that sparkled like tiny stars under the afternoon sun. Here, two figures met. A woman in her late years, carrying a basket woven from thin reeds, and a young man who walked steadily towards the village below. The woman paused at the sound of approaching footsteps, looking up to see him approach. Her hands were still moving, deftly arranging strands of grass into plaited ropes for weaving baskets. He stopped beside her, observing the intricate work without comment. A small bird called out from a nearby bush, its voice clear and sharp against the quiet. "Would you like some tea?" she asked him, lifting her head to meet his gaze. He nodded, and together they walked back towards an old wooden hut that clung precariously to the steep slope of the mountain. Inside, everything was warm from a long day's sun. The woman set down her basket near a pile of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, sage and chamomile, their fragrances mingling softly in the air. While she worked over a low fire, the young man watched intently as she carefully measured out leaves into a clay pot filled with water that steamed gently. Outside, raindrops began to patter against the hut's wooden walls. The sound was constant yet soothing, like breathing slowly and deeply. When the tea was ready, they sat down on worn benches by the fire. The woman handed him a cup of hot liquid that steamed slightly, its scent aromatic but not overpowering. He sipped it carefully, his eyes following the swirls left behind as steam rose to dissipate into the room's air. They spoke little. A conversation was unnecessary. There was something comfortable about simply being in each other's company without words. Each sip of tea became a shared moment, a silent understanding between them that required no explanation. The rain continued its steady patter outside, matching their quiet rhythm. After finishing his cup, he placed it gently on the table beside her basket, where she had resumed her work with renewed focus. She offered him another cup without needing to ask. They exchanged smiles and nods in acknowledgement of each other's presence. As they were about to part ways, a sudden gust of wind made the dried herbs dance overhead. A single leaf fluttered down and landed perfectly still between them on the wooden bench, brown and crinkled yet whole. The young man picked up the leaf delicately with 2 fingers before placing it back onto the bench exactly where it had fallen. He then turned to continue his journey downward, while she watched him go, her gaze following until he disappeared from sight behind a curve in the path. Inside the hut, the low fire burned slowly, casting flickering shadows across the walls and floor. The woman returned to her basket making, her hands moving rhythmically through the reeds as the rain continued its gentle patter outside, now softer than before, but no less persistent.
Somewhere down the mountain, a single bell tolled softly into the rain. On a hillside terrace after a storm, the air was cool and fresh.
On a hillside terrace after a storm, the air was cool and fresh. Dew glittered on the grass as if every blade had its own dewdrop to carry. A stonecutter named Jiro rested beneath a gnarled old oak tree with his lunch pail beside him, looking out at the view that stretched down to the valley below. The storm clouds had cleared, leaving only soft gray wisps that scattered over the hills like sheep. Nearby, an old woman appeared, her arms filled with wildflowers plucked from the meadow. She placed them in a small vase and set it next to Jiro's lunch pail before sitting down herself. "Beautiful day," she said quietly, nodding towards the horizon where the sun was beginning to climb. Jiro grunted, acknowledging her but not needing her gaze. He had his work and her flowers were no concern of his. She didn't mind, instead, she arranged a few blossoms into small bunches beside her. The air between them was calm, though unspoken questions hovered like butterflies around the edges of their space. As Jiro ate, he noticed how she picked up an old notebook from the grass and began writing something down with a pen that was nearly dry. Her fingers moved slowly over the paper as if each stroke required careful thought. Sometimes, her gaze would drift to him or out across the view beyond, before returning to her task. Jiro finished his food and started gathering his tools, looking for where he had left them in the grass. The woman offered him a drink from her water bottle. He took it without speaking and drank deeply. His lips lingered on the cold metal when he returned it to her, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. She waited quietly while Jiro readied himself for work again. When she saw him about to stand up, she placed a single flower in his lunch pail. It was one of the wildest flowers, not soft and sweet but strong and resilient like the hills around them. He looked down at it, then back up at her with surprise. She only smiled and watched as he set off down the hillside. The grass brushed against his legs as he walked away, carrying with him a small bloom that seemed to follow the path of his steps. She remained there on the terrace under the oak tree, watching until he disappeared from view before tucking her notebook into the crook of her arm and beginning to walk in another direction. Later, Jiro would notice how one petal had fallen out of his lunch pail as he ate that night, landing softly beside him like a tiny whisper. He didn't know why it touched him so, only that it did, and he left the flower there on his plate for someone else to see when they came to clean up. As she walked off into her own day, the old woman could hear Jiro's stonecutter hammer in the distance, ringing clear across the hills. It was a sound she carried with her, like an echo of the small moment between them earlier, something left hanging quietly on the air.
The hammering paused, then resumed with a steady rhythm that blended into the afternoon hum. In the quiet alley between two clay walls, under a sky that was neither dark nor light, but somewhere in between.
In the quiet alley between two clay walls, under a sky that was neither dark nor light, but somewhere in between, a weaver named Hannah sat. Her fingers were stiff and slow as she threaded through her work. A young girl of 12 or 13 approached, carrying a small woven basket. "Hannah," she said softly, "may I sit?" Without looking up, Hannah made space for the girl beside her. They sat in silence for a while. The wind was barely there, just enough to make the alley's narrowness feel like a gentle embrace. "What are you making?" asked the girl after some time had passed. "A piece of cloth," said Hannah, still focusing on threading her needle through the warp. "It's hard work when my hands don't cooperate." "I see," replied the girl. She put down her basket and picked up one of Hannah's unfinished pieces. She ran a hand over the rough texture carefully. "You have strong fingers," observed Hannah, glancing at the girl who was handling her fabric with care. "Your skin isn't worn like mine." The girl smiled faintly, but said nothing as she continued to examine the cloth. When she was done, she put it back down and looked towards the alley's end where a single streetlight flickered. "What will you do when you can no longer weave?" asked Hannah suddenly. "I don't know," answered the girl honestly. "I haven't thought about that." Hannah nodded slowly, her eyes following her needle as it passed through the threads again and again. "When I was your age, I used to dream of never stopping, of working until my fingers couldn't move any longer because I loved making things so much." The girl listened intently but didn't interrupt Hannah's quiet thoughts. "I remember when I first felt this," continued Hannah, holding up her hand and showing the thickened calluses. "It was like a warning from something inside me telling me to slow down. But by then, my dreams had already set themselves in stone." The girl remained silent, but seemed to understand what Hannah meant. "I've learned to accept it," said Hannah finally. "Each day feels both harder and easier than the last. It's like learning a new dance every time I sit here." She took her breath as she worked, then continued speaking without looking away from her task. "Do you ever feel that way about anything? Like something keeps growing stronger even when it shouldn't?" The girl thought for a moment before saying, "Sometimes I do." She hesitated again and then admitted, "I want to be better at my weaving, but sometimes the threads just don't seem to listen." "Threads are stubborn," agreed Hannah. "But so is the weaver." She paused momentarily, as if gathering her thoughts. Then she added softly, "It's not about giving up, though. It's about learning to dance with them instead of trying to control every step." The girl nodded thoughtfully, looking down at her hands and then back towards Hannah. "Do you ever wish for younger fingers?" asked the girl quietly. "No," replied Hannah firmly. "I just wish I had more patience when my hands were still nimble enough to do whatever I wanted." She smiled gently at this reflection. The two fell into silence once again, each lost in their own thoughts, but sharing a quiet understanding. As the light grew dimmer outside the alley, the girl finally stood up and began gathering her things from the basket. Hannah watched her carefully as she did so, wondering if there was something more to be said. But before either of them could speak again, the girl placed one final item, a small, worn-out spool of thread, into Hannah's hand. "It's not much," she offered shyly, "but maybe it will help you dance with your threads a little easier." Touched by this unexpected gift, Hannah smiled warmly and thanked her without words. The girl nodded slightly in acknowledgement before turning to leave the alley. As the door clicked shut behind her, Hannah held on to the spool, feeling its weight in her palm. She let out a long breath as she watched the flickering streetlight outside, her own silent smile still lingering on her lips.
The spool spun slowly between her fingers, catching the last glimmer of light. Each story whispered softly to its neighbor across these hours, like the gentle hum of early summer. The lamps dim at the empty tea house. Until tomorrow.